Welcome, wandering souls and lost sailors, to the Ship of the Dead podcast.
Welcome aboard, me salty dogs, to the Ship of the Dead. My guest today is none other than legendary arcane wizard himself, Mike Murals. Mike is the executive producer for RPGs at Chaosium, and he was also the lead designer on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Mike, welcome aboard the Ship of the Dead.
Dude, yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to hang out, talk about games. And,
yeah, dude, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to, sail around the Dark Caribbean, talk about RPGs and stuff.
It's good life if you can get it, right?
It is. It's weird because, usually when people are, have changes in their career that aren't, don't arrive when you want them to or when you're planning for them, it's usually kind of sad. But I feel like for us in the RPG community, like we have welcomed back one of our brethren that has been missing because you have no longer with Magic. You're back in RPGs and like back on social media. We get to interact with you. I see you at conventions. How's that been?
It's been fun, and it was wild because I knew that like the layoffs are coming. I'd been at Wizards for so long and I kind of knew where things are going and people were pretty transparent with me. I mean, I was pretty fortunate. I was high up enough in the structure. I was basically working on some new games and they were just like, Hazardous had some trouble business wise. And so I kind of saw it coming, but it was funny because when I got laid off and it's like, it was in December and I was still getting paid through the end of the year, technically still an employee. Then I had severance and I just had to go through this thing of like, what do I want to do when I grow up? Because I'd been there for so long and I realized, the last time I looked for a job was like 1998 or 7. Because I just was like working out of college. I was really lucky, I got a job and then we just kind of moved from job to job. I never like needed a job. And even when I went to Wizards, it was like, oh, okay, cool. It'd be cool to work on D&D. So I'll apply. But I was still working, doing freelance writing and stuff. And it was either that or grad school. And I ended up going to Wizards. And then 18 years go by and it's like, I'm like really bad at finding a job. Like I am terrible at this, right? Like, and also the worst thing was the game industry was completely imploding and still is, at least the video game side. And so it was also this like existential crisis. Like, do I want to keep doing role-playing games? But even if I want to be a video game designer, can I get a job over there? Because it's like falling apart.
Sure.
So it was like really weird. And so what I did, I decided to, kind of looking for a job and I ended up getting the Chaosium thing, which was cool. So, okay, I get to stay in tabletop. Yeah. And then I just started this Patreon and I just started writing stuff like, twice a week. And I was like, okay, we'll see where this goes. I have some ideas, but we'll see if something comes out. And then, so like in December, I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready. I didn't want to just show up on social media as like, hey, I got laid off and here I am again. Like, what do I have to talk about, other than getting laid off, which would just be a bummer. Like, that's all I'm just, What can
you tell us about Chaosium? What can you tell us what the gig is? I'm sure you've got NDAs for what you're working on, right?
Oh, so sort of. We've got, for most of it, but like we just but before we started this interview, I was like going through the playtest comments for, we're doing a new version of RuneQuest.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been, brought in to guide. So RuneQuest, if people aren't familiar, it was like the first game that like really made a go at competing with D&D back in the 70s. The system was designed by this guy, Steve Perrin, who started with D&D, and he got really into the Society for Creative Anachronism, the SCA. And so he decided, hey, like I spend my weekends like fighting in armor and weapons, recreating this stuff. And the D&D combat system is nothing like, how it actually went. So he came up with this system. And then this guy, Greg Stafford, who kind of like almost like Ed Greenwood, if you're familiar with his background with Forgotten Realms, Greg had created this world of Glorantha and was also a gamer. And sort of decided like, hey, I have this world I've been working on, kind of, maybe I'm going to write some fiction in it. But what if I made a game? And so he started with war games set there. But then eventually he and Steve Perrin got together and they made RuneQuest. And I think the first edition came out in 77 or 78. And it really stood out because it was kind of one of the first role-playing games, fantasy role-playing games, to have like a very distinct setting attached to it. Where like Tunnels and Trolls and D&D were basically like, this mishmash of Conan, Lord of the Rings, etc. RuneQuest is set in Glorantha. It's a very, like, it's the world Greg made. Like, it's designed to work within it. It took off back then. It kind of went into this quiet period in the late 80s. Had a resurgence in the 90s and kind of went quiet again. And it kind of this pattern, it had a resurgence in the early aughts and kind of went quiet again. And so the current edition that Chaosium publishes, RuneQuest Glorantha, is awesome. Like if you kind of already know Glorantha, or you're like, hey, I really want to get into the setting and like learn a lot about the setting than run a campaign here. But
Yeah.
what we've seen is that there are people who just want more like, hey, I want another fantasy game I can play.
Yeah,
And
sure.
more, D&D-ish or Pathfinder-ish. So we're looking at making basically a game that is set in Glorantha that has the RuneQuest name, but is meant to be very accessible and
Yeah, a little more of
focused on
an easy on-ramp, yeah.
exactly, and kind of focused on that, like, hey, go loot ruins and like fight monsters style of gameplay. Because a lot of people they'll tell you what's cool about Glorantha is like it's got these really fleshed out cultures, it's got a lot of history and myth, and so a lot of the fun is in just exploring that, almost like a living in the world.
Can you give us like maybe a cursory overview or like an elevator pitch, or like what's the setting, what's the flavor of the setting, why would someone be interested in that setting?
Yeah, so Glorantha is a fantasy world where every element of reality is based in mythic stories and magic. So the rivers flow from the mountains to the sea, not because of gravity, but because the spirits of the river are returning home. Like the rain falls from the mountains, and now the water wants to return back to the sea where it began. When you think about why the world was built, and who built it, well, there were these gods who lived on this world literally at one point. They lived in the world, and there was this massive war between those gods and chaos. And if you go into like there's one region called Prax, if you go to Prax, there is still remnants of that fighting. There was an area of just like dead magic because the Stormbull, this god who killed the devil, like this personification of chaos, like this is where he landed, like on this spot right here. And that's cool. Why it's dead magic, because the world, like the earth itself, had to give life to Stormbull so he could keep fighting. And so then when you meet someone who's like, I'm a Stormbull cultist, I'm like this big rude berserker, and like, I kind of flout like local traditions, and I'm not very mannered. Well, you're cool with that because this guy is literally like a living embodiment of like, hey, this guy fights chaos. Chaos is really bad. Like, chaos is almost like the Cthulhu mythos, and this is the guy who doesn't get struck with madness, doesn't flee in terror. He grabs his weapon and attacks it. So, okay, we're okay with that. We can put up with him. And that's what's a lot about, taking this idea of this mythic history and then bringing it to the forefront of the setting. So when you're dealing with stuff, you're also dealing with the mythic truths of the world.
Okay, cool. So are you doing like mechanic design, or are you just taking it, like, what are you actually doing for your work?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of it right now is doing the organizational stuff. I mean, that's all the stuff I learned over the years to just, get stuff done, build schedules, make sure everyone's on time, all the boring stuff, but it's the
project management. Yeah.
Yeah. But so what I'm focused on right now is I did a lot of the initial system design, and that was taking the existing system and saying, okay, are there ways we can get similar results, but with simpler systems? Mm-hmm. And so doing a lot of streamlining. And then specifically like what I was doing today before our call is I was going through playtest feedback. Yeah. So we posted, like, we have a Facebook group. We also have our Discord. So we started with the Facebook group, then we're moving over to the Discord, where you can, sign an NDA and grab a playtest packet, start playing, and give us feedback. Because we're acutely aware, like, this is a game where we want to bring in new players. We want to bring them into a community that's excited to see them, and not like, you're playing the new crappy version, like, we hate what you did with it. So, it's a balancing act. We want to make sure that people who, we're honoring, it's not quite 50 yet, but, the years of history behind the game and the current community that's kept RuneQuest and Glorantha going. So, make sure it's accessible, but also make sure that it's resonant and it rings true to the current fans. So
this is probably too early to ask this, but do you know, like with your future with Chaosium, are you going to be permanently on RuneQuest, or are you going to get to move around and work on Pendragon and Call of Cthulhu at all?
Oh yeah, I'd definitely be moving around. We're looking at we've got stuff we're working on now, and we don't have a release date for this game, because part of it's going to be the playtest, what that determines. But yeah, we're actually already planning out some new games. And there might be some other stuff we do that's outside of those core titles that we do.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I know a lot of people talk to you about 5e, but I thought maybe I would take this opportunity to ask you about things that aren't necessarily 5e. Like, what games are you into? What is inspiring you? We're going to talk about Odyssey in a second, but like, what are you playing right now? Like, what's getting your gears going as far as RPGs?
Yeah, so I got the obvious things. I'm running the new RuneQuest, so I got that.
Of course,
my Wednesday group playing it. I started running the new edition or update to D&D mainly because I want to get my head wrapped around it, kind of see what was different. Like what I'm playing for fun. So like the games that I've got Shadow Dark. I got it on my shelf right here. I'm taking a look over at it. Love Shadow
you're a big
Dark.
Fan. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's so easy to dive into. It hits all the notes I want out of like a sleek, compact game for D&D that I can get into. Old school essentials, 'cause I started with BX D&D way back in the day, so that's a game that I'm like, oh hey, cool. This is like basically that game, but like it's like a remaster of it. It's like, oh cool, it's the game I like, but it's got better graphics.
They went in and denoised it. And
exactly.
All exactly. It's a great game. I mean, the other thing is, it's a great game, but really even better than that is the support moving forward, like their adventures. And Gavin's like layout aesthetic is it's so good at getting that game into your head, Oh
yeah, and it's such
a great Shadow Dark, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, and both. That's I think what makes those games so appealing is they have such great creator communities. It's so easy to just go on and just see what people are doing. I was super tempted. Like that was one of the things I was thinking of doing. Like when I left Wizards, I'm like, well, do I just want to, get a job like at a, maybe a video game company or like move into like project management, producing, because that's kind of also one of my skill sets. Is I just know how to get stuff done, and and just do this on the side and just publish purely what I want, which might just be old school essentials like stuff. Yeah,
tempting.
Yeah, and that's always I think a hallmark of a good game. Other games I'm playing, Alien. I love Alien. That game is so well put together, and it's a great example of the mechanics and everything else just fitting really well together.
Yeah, I mean, especially the stress dice, just reinforcing the whole world. So good. Clearly, I'm wearing an alien hat, like always.
And so let's see. And a lot of the Free League stuff I liked. So Dragonbane, that's another fun one. I haven't had a chance to run it in a while. I really liked there's something fun about playing a game that takes the kind of like D&D sort of approach to adventure, but then wraps it in just very different game mechanics.
Very different, yeah.
It's almost like listening to like a remix of like,
that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like...
Are you a big music guy?
Sort of.
It's your second music reference, so I was going to ask.
My daughter's really, like, that's turned out to be her thing. Like, she plays violin. I don't know anything about music. Like, if I had to explain how music works, I'd be like... If you were to like ask me like, hey, here's a guitar, like make it make noises, I would just be like thrashing around on it. Like the past year I got really into like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
The Lizard Wizard, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I actually saw them in Austria last year. It was incredible.
Man,
dude,
lucky.
Those guys.
And I love how their albums are all so different.
So different, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's so fun. And then my other thing is like lately I've been getting super into like 70s country, like old school.
Oh really?
Country. Yeah, like Gary
like
Clark.
Who? Anybody I would know?
I think I'd have to check my I'll look at my phone right now. But yeah, like I mean obviously guys like Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, but some of these other guys, you're gonna look, cause this is the nice thing about like the end of the world and the cyberpunk future we live in is that like I have all this stuff right in my phone. But no, so guys like Chris Christopherson, start listening to his stuff.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Guy Clark,
okay. I listened to your Ben Riggs interview earlier today. Recent one, and I was thinking of it makes me think about AI. Like we're not too far from like, hey, play me music that sounds like this era of music, but written by this guy who's alive right now. It's like it's literally like right around the corner before that's everywhere. Which is scary and cool.
It is. It is kind of. It's not kind of scary. It's terrifying. Like I guess on one hand, so I just turned 50, and on one hand I'm like, well, if I do the math, by the time my brain starts to turn to Swiss cheese, it'll be like I got like another 12 years. Yeah, which might be timed well so that when my cognitive function starts to go, they'll have like the Matrix style tubes they just put you in where it's like, grandpa. Yeah. And it's you just get whatever sensory thing you want. Yeah. Like, like make the music sound like it's the 80s. I'm in an arcade again. And hey, I'm happy. I feel like I'm 8, right?
Or Mike Mearls his brain is in a vat now. Yeah. You can access him anywhere. Access his game design mechanics directly with ChatGPT 2035. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And I'll be like, well, at least I got to see like 50, 60 years of real life before this all, turned terrible.
Yeah, I have to think it'll hopefully balance out with the rest of humanity's needs, but you never know, man. Also, you could just be owned by robots very quickly. Let's move back to game design here, right? I want to talk about Odyssey, because that's the working title of your RPG, which is available. The playtest document is available for free on your Patreon. What is the design goal for this thing? It seems kind of close to 5e right now. It's not maybe a BX thing like you might have hinted at, who's it for? Is there a timeline for it? Are you having fun doing it? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun doing it. I worry I'm having too much fun doing it, and maybe I'll just keep working on it and never actually finish it. So it basically, the germ of it came about based on two things. One was I've got a daughter, I've got family, I have like elder relatives I help take care of, so I'm very pressed for time, and I love playing role-playing games. And I realized, because I also love playing Magic the Gathering, that with Magic Arena, I actually had to uninstall it from my machine.
Really?
Because I was playing too much. I'd be just like, I'll just go into a draft real quick. But what I realized was like, hey, I have played more Magic in the past few years than the rest of my life combined and multiplied by 100. Yeah. Because I just, I can do it like in 30 minutes or an hour, right? I can just hop into a draft, build my deck, then just be done, go out, do all my stuff. Then I got 10 minutes before getting my daughter to bed. I can come in, work my draft deck, take a look at it, listen to I'm listening to a podcast on the way to work maybe, or while I'm off for a walk, some insights into the set that I can play. Then I can do my one match at a time. Hey, it's lunchtime. I can just do one match and, over the course of 3 or 4 days, play a draft. Yeah. And it just occurred to me, like, why can't I get that for role-playing games, right? Like, what would that look like? And then obviously, role-playing games, the fun is playing with your friends, with Magic on Arena, I'm playing against strangers, and that works, with just the decks versus the decks, it's the...
when you're on Arena, you actually don't even get to talk to the person. Like they've removed that part of the experience. Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, I don't really mind. It's not a social experience, right? This really is just, I built my deck. I want to see your deck. Let's play, right? And, thanks to matchmaking, I'm playing against people at my skill level. So I get a real sense, So, I thought a lot about it. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic was I found, kind of a similar thing. I could play games almost as often as I wanted if I just kept myself to 1 hour chunks. Once I went over an hour, it either bumped into other stuff in my schedule. I'm also the type, like on Zoom calls, like after an hour or two, I'm just kind of done. Like it's just, I need to just step away. So what I found was I was running these really short form games, and I had to just hack the hell out of 5th edition to get it to work. I'm assuming these are, if it's COVID, they're all Zoom games, right?
Yeah, Zoom games, yeah. I tried Roll20. I played in a game using Roll20, and I get why some people like it, but I found it was I just didn't enjoy it. It was too far. I'm like, hey, if I'm playing kind of in this digital interface, I'd rather just play like Overwatch with my friends. Like, let's just play a video game. So I had to hack the heck out of 5th edition to make it work, because like using the current game system, like it was just too much of a bear to, get everything down into an hour. And more importantly, like, the number of people who could show up was always very variable. It could go from 3 to like 8. Yeah. So the 5e tools, like they really struggle, to make that work. Yeah, just because you have to rebalance all your encounters and that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly, right? And the system makes it kind of hard to do that. So I started building this entire like different, set of DM tools for 5e, and I used those for years. And they were very loose, and they kind of needed me to run them. I couldn't, like, if I tried to show someone else how to use them, it's like code that wasn't commented. It's like, well, this is why this is named. It's not written out into clear language yet. Yeah, exactly. When I got laid off from Wizards, I thought, well, maybe that's what I want to do. That was kind of one of the things on like, here's what I could do. So I started just writing straight up like 5th edition content. And then, but as I was writing, I realized that, like what I really want to do is blow up the monster manual and the DMG and rewrite those. And then what I also realized was, and this is like one of the last things I concluded, like, whatever, figured out, the 5th edition approach to characters is very rigid. Like every class kind of has to look the same on a very fundamental level. I watched this really interesting video about how systems determine how you act. Like, just the act, like let's say we were going to make a game and we decided, there's an art department and then there's a level design department. Like, by just deciding that before we even started doing the work, we already decided what our game's going to look like, So that really resonated with me thinking about character building. And so I was like, well, what if like the monk had like 4 actions and each one was like the equivalent of like a single unarmed blow, but they could use them at any point in the round when they wanted, so it feels much more fluid. Could you do something different for each character class and really make it feel very distinct? And so at that point, it's like, okay, I'm rewriting all the DM stuff, I'm rewriting the monster manual, and now I think I'm going to rewrite the chassis for characters. Plus, like what I kind of learned going back and writing more 5e content was like, man, there's 20 levels, there's so much content, it's so technical the way it's written, and like 5.5 kind of doubled down on all that stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm not really, So it wasn't, it's like if I'm going to be doing this for fun, then it's going to be something I enjoy. So all that led to basically this idea of making take the core concept of 5th edition and boil it down to something that's playable in an hour, that gives the DM like really flexible and easy to use tools for building encounters and being flexible during play to just like, oh, only half my group showed up. Well, it's pretty easy to rebalance everything. It's simply adjusting a number or two.
Yeah.
And then for players, giving them something where it's like, oh, I played a fighter and now I want to try playing a monk, and it feels like a completely different game I'm playing now.
Oh yeah, you've loaded up a set of controls.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like thinking like Overwatch or other hero shooters where it's like, oh, like playing Winston is one experience, the big gorilla who's more of a tank. But now if I play Tracer, I still have my controller or my keyboard, but it's just wildly different how I'm thinking of how I play, how my my kit works together. And so hopefully not only keeping the game fresh for players, but then kind of thinking selfishly for me, like, well, if I'm going to be designing more stuff for this, I want to have a lot of flexibility to do interesting, things. I'm not just stamping out the next subclass, So yeah, and then I kind of wanted, basically, something that's really sleek, easy to run. But at the same time, this kind of all came into like, because I did have this like long thing, like why don't I just use OSE or Shadow Dark? And kind of what I thought about this quote from a friend of mine who said something like, he liked playing those games, but he missed having the character from 5e where he really felt like his character had like a power set. Like, oh, here's my cool stuff that I get that no one else gets. Like, in old school style games, it's often a lot of player creativity, which he enjoyed. But he just missed like, hey, I'm like, playing a ranger in 3rd edition. So I have 3rd edition D&D. So I have a pet wolf and I have these spells. And, here's just some like stuff I can do that no one else can do.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you were playing like Street Fighter and there were no combos or finishing moves, and it's like, some people just want to smash buttons and think about who their character is, but other people like the gaming element of like, okay, I'm going to do this and then this and then this, and then boom, wow, my character did something that nobody else can do. I can see that approach, especially for other gamers.
Exactly. And so I was kind of thinking, and the thing is, once you build that, you can then go ahead and build like a really simple version of those characters. Yeah. And so I kind of felt like, it's worth like doing all this work because I don't see a game that exactly matches what I'm looking for.
Wait, I'm sorry. When you say simple characters, do you mean like think tanking, like the higher level version, and then you're scaling it back so what they start at, or what do you mean by simple version?
Oh yeah. So basically, like a character that in play has like a very simple interface and like very simple outcomes. So like, hey, I don't care about it engaging with the mechanics at all or very little. Okay, well, and here's the fighter who is just like, you're just good at hitting things. You make one attack and you do a bunch of damage. Yeah. Or like you're the pyromancer, so like you can just blast people with fire. So mechanically, when we roll initiative or whatever, you're like, well, I just blast the guy. Okay, and I just keep doing that. And that's fine. Or like the fighter type who looks more like, say, an old school Essentials fighter, a BX fighter, which is like, well, I have attacks. Like, that's it. Like, what's cool about my character is I do more damage. For me, a good system, you can kind of boil it down. So you can just kind of go to the raw math and it'll work. So it's just like, great, your fighter does expected damage per round by this system. So therefore, you can just have a button that says hit guy, right? Whereas other players, they just want to be more engaged. Like I have more tricks I can do and I can get, above that mark or whatever I can mess up and go below it.
Sure.
So that's kind of the idea is it's easier to go with something that's more robust but can scale down. So that was my other kind of justification. Like, okay, then I think I should go ahead and build this system because I think I can keep all my players happy and then keep me happy, which is like really at the end of the day, it's like, it's really why I want to do this because I just want to have a rule book that's mine and howopefully like maybe crowdfund it.
Why not?
Get some art.
I feel like you've just given me the how it started side of the meme. Like how's it going? Like, have you been playing it?
So I've been playing it from the DM side. So I just finished a bunch of character class stuff a couple weeks ago, and it's actually sort of funny how this all works out. So I'm doing all this work on the math and like getting the encounter building. And I started with 5th edition as my starting point, and I pared down a bunch of stuff. And then there's all this like system nerdy, like, oh, I did this, and like you can move this value from here to here, and then it opens blah, 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 whatever. But the big thing I realized was like I was working on my monsters, and I said, I could just take to take a step back. Paul over at blogofholding.com, and I'm blanking on his last name, so apologies to Paul. He did a breakdown. He, God bless me, went through the 5.5 monster manual and entered all the monster data into like a spreadsheet and figured out like, okay, here's what it looks like. So I was like, I could just take that data and like point my spreadsheet at it and I'll have a monster builder for 5th edition. So I just did. And then it's like, oh, okay, great. So like, why not? Like, like it'll be, in some ways it's kind of fun because it's like, here's a game I worked on like, 10 years ago.
Do you feel like you have, I mean, I think a lot of us have hacked 5th edition. Of course, I've hacked it for naval combat. We've all hacked 5th edition. Do you feel like you have like a little bit more licensed than most of us to hack it because you're like, I wrote the book, damn it, I can hack it however I want.
Well, it's funny because I think what helps is like it's like I see the seams. It's like because I was here when we built this thing, so I kind of know like I think there's a tendency. I think there's like this kind of fork in the road you get as a TTRPGer. Yeah. You either like read the rule book and then it's either like the vibes or the rules, whatever. You just kind of do what it says to do, or and that's the path of like the like, hey, I play these games. Or there's like the path of the designer, which is like, wait, like I'm gonna change. Like I could start changing this. Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, exactly right. And I kind of feel like like for me at least, it's almost like I have like root level access to the system where it's like, oh, I know CR is it's bullshit because I made it right. Like I was the one who decided to do that.
Yeah, you're like bonus actions, bullshit.
Yeah. And so I think, in some ways it's even like simple things like in Odyssey, like one of the things I did with the system was, in 5th edition, you swing your sword, you add your strength bonus to your damage roll. And one of the things that I know, because I worked a lot in the math, is that, well, that really bloats the math up because like, that adding 5 to every damage roll at high levels, just it really stacks up.
Yeah.
If you pull that out of the system and say, no, we're not going to put your damage bonus to your attacks, but we're going to instead give you character options, like your class will give you a damage like bonus. So rather than say getting +5, it's like, oh, you get an extra attack, but you're not adding your strength. So there's little things like that. Oh, that's kind of like, I think most players would say like, oh, that's more fun. Like,
I'd rather hack twice and miss and do the same amount of damage. Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's cool.
Yeah, so little things like that, especially with the math side. I'm a big spreadsheet and systems guy. So yeah, it's fun, and a lot of it is just simple things like there's all these funky little things about the system, like in 5th edition, you're limited to attuning to 3 magic items because I don't know, 3 sounded like the right number.
Yeah, okay.
So like big, like things like that, where it's like some of these things are very carefully like considered, and others were just like, I don't know, it seems to work. That's a great example. Like that overall direction for Attunement was just to keep complexity down, because we saw in playtest people were just like, oh, I have like 15 magic items and like they're all super complicated because that's the right play. Yeah. It's like, well, let's cap that at 3. Just simple things like that, where it's like I can kind of see how the system goes. Like, well, we could pull that out, or like don't pull this out, or like things like that.
It's so interesting to hear you be so like I don't think that nonchalant is the best word, but the D&D community as a whole and the 5e community specifically they're so like into debating these points, especially on forums. Like it's a big part of that culture is like, what do they mean? How should it work? Here's the builds. And you're like, we picked 3 because it seemed like the right number. I just love that. I just love that.
Yeah, it's weird, man. Like sometimes like, there's the culture and then the actual game. Like it's so funny to see. I saw something just today where people were arguing about something, and I almost felt like, man, if I had known that adding that to the game would make people like this on tilt, like, I just wouldn't have done it. Like, who cares? Like, we didn't think whatever the topic was. Like, no, we just did it because we had to put something in there.
I mean, I think we're also in a weird spot too, because D&D, like if you go back to 2014 when you guys were doing all this work, like you were making D&D for D&D players, Yeah. And like now it has become something so much bigger, like when you look at Critical Role, like are shows like that, like they don't really need to be playing 5th edition. Like a lot of what they're doing would happen with OSE or Shadow Dark. Like they roll a D20 and then they talk about it for a long time, So it's interesting to like the vehicle that has grown huge may not have been the best rules vehicle to be the like mega popular game that D&D is now.
No, and that's what's wild about the entire culture right now around role-playing games.
Yeah.
Is like, I was thinking about that, and you're right, and it's sort of weird, like, why don't people question the rules more? Like that is like one of the things I think is funny. But, I remember even back in the 80s when I first got into these games, the first time I found Dragon Magazine, it kind of broke my brain because there was sage advice, the like write them a letter and ask them a rules question.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I was like 9 years old, 10, like that just seems super weird to me. I'm like, I had like the basic set from like 1978, and I think it even says in there like, oh, just make it up as you go, right? And to me, that's what I liked.
You're not saying that it's weird that the rules were malleable. You're saying that it's weird that some people didn't think they were malleable and they needed clarification. Yeah, okay.
Like, I just had this image in my mind of someone like they're playing D&D and they're like, oh, what happens if I fall on like, my character's going to fall 50 feet on top of a dragon. What happens?
Yeah.
And then everyone stops playing so they can write a letter to Lake Geneva. And it's like, do they wait? Did they just not play? Like, what was the DM doing? Right? Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around that dynamic, but clearly tons of people do that.
Of course. I have an interesting aside on this topic because, I had kind of not been looking for the door, but, when I was running my pirate game in 5e, it was like level cap at 6, long rests can only happen when you're not at sea, all these rule changes. And I was running my table like that, like you would run a BX game. Hey, there aren't rules for this. Let's just make it up, and then I discovered the OSR and then get Pirate Borg going. And my brother and I were running Pirate Borg at Gen Con. We ran like 20 games because we had a GM cancel on us. But we're like, hey, we need to keep our 5e side going. So we're going to run a 2-table 5e naval combat, like one group attacks by land, one attacks by sea. It's going to be great, And we've been running Pirate Borg all weekend, laughing at the Pirate Borg tables, good times, lots of stories. And we get to the 5e table and they're like, half the group is like good con spirits, but the other half are like kind of what you expect out of some of these 5e groups, which are very rules lawyery, contradicting Tyler and I GM decisions. Like, actually, that spell would work like this. And him and I were both just like, oh, yeah, like that's a great way to play. You can engage however you want, but that's just it wasn't the perfect fit for my style of GMing. So, yeah, I'm with you.
The story really super resonates with me because I think that's kind of what I was wrestling with was like, do I want to make a game that sells? Which, maybe that means like it has to be super rulesy and super like, now everybody, this is how it works. So be sure to pay attention. Yeah. Or like how I like to write games, which is like, hey, here's some stuff, but like break it and change it and make it yours because that's what's fun about this. And my radical opinion is that the freeformers have the right of it. Like really what most people just want is enough system so everyone at the table can talk intelligibly. Like, oh, hey, like, hey, we should fight this dragon. Oh, I don't know. My AC is really low, guys. I think I need some new armor. Like, oh, okay. That since we all know what AC is and we know, we want higher, right? Like if the person playing the fighter in the group is like, oh, my armor sucks. My armor class is only 16. I think we need something better. Okay. We all know what that means, right? It's shortcut, right? Yeah. The fighter player isn't saying, well, I'm wearing iron scale. And everyone's like, okay, what does that mean in terms of the game? The fighter player can just say, my AC is at 16. Can we go get me some better armor? Yeah. And then, most of the fun of the game coming from the interaction between the players and player and GM. And like my kind of theory of that is I think if people really did like when the person who has not yet played a tabletop role-playing game but wants to, what's the game that is going to get them into the hobby? What's the game they're looking for? I kind of have this theory, the reason why we make so many games like digital, whatever, tabletop, is always new games coming out. Everyone has their perfect game. Yeah, they're never going to find that game, but they're going to find games that are close, but they're going to be close in different ways, right? So like I look at a game like Armored Core 6 and I'm like, I have to play this game, right? Like I just saw someone play on Steam, I'm like, whoa, like I need to be in the flying robot, and that's just speaks to me, right? If I showed it to my wife, she'd just be like, okay, whatever, nerd. But if I showed her, if I showed her like the new Mario Kart, she's excited. She loves Nintendo games. That's what she grew up on. She loves those games. My daughter, very similar, but if you showed her like, Super Smash Brothers, right? She gets excited about that. She likes competitive games. My wife likes more indirect competition. But I think that if we look across the history of tabletop role-playing games, it has generally been when we look at when the hobby is expanding, it's because the hobby has become accessible along the lines of storytelling, premise, with mechanics that are like pretty easy to explain to somebody. So yeah, obviously D&D way back in the day, but like BX D&D in the early 80s when the game was really taking off. 5th edition, I mean, okay, it's 1,000 pages of rules, but if you started with just the starter set, it's pretty compact and the rules are pretty loosey-goosey, Sure. Vampire the Masquerade, I mean, that game was 100% vibes, like, hey, you get to play as a vampire, right? Okay, cool, that sounds neat, the entire 90s vibe. And, when I had friends or people I've met who were into it, they remember stuff about like the Camarilla, the rules for like engagement, like, here's, a prince rules the city and you can't break the masquerade unless you're the, I forget the names of the, they were the vampires who were just like, no, screw it, we should rule. And the Camarilla was like, no, we should stay hidden. They remember all that stuff and they remember the names of some of the abilities. But if you start asking like, okay, so then if you were in a car chase in the World of Darkness system, like they don't remember like what dice they'd roll and all this stuff. Course. Wasn't important. What was important to them was like, oh, we had this awesome car chase. There was like, we're trying to chase down this guy and we flipped the car over, but then, we had a Bruce in the group and he just picked the car up and flipped it back over and you're like, oh, we just got back in and whatever. It's like, that's what gets people excited. I mean, the thing is, like people want to tell you about their characters, want to tell you about their campaign. Critical Role is just literally like Matt Mercer's saving us the effort of him having to tell us about his campaign because we just get to watch him play. Right?
I mean, but I guess the counter argument though is that Matt does know the rules really well.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
He knows them so well or he can adjudicate so well that it never gets in the way of the story, which I think is often not the case at some home tables where the rules arbitering takes over, I wonder
if that's kind of part of the the journey, right? Like you get this game and it's a game, I should follow the rules, and then you master the rules. But then you can almost imagine it's like rules mastery exists on one level, but then like game mastery, like literally the act of running the game, these two things, like at some point your game mastery skill goes above your rules skill and you learn, hey, that's actually the game mastery skill that people are here for.
I feel like to bring it back to the Matrix, it's like, he's like, how come I can't beat you? He's like, you're too fast. You're like, why can't you hit me? You're like, you're too fast. He's like, you think that's air you're breathing? It's like the real game master is like, knows there are no rules, Yeah, I'm with you.
Exactly, right? It's the much harder rule set to master, which is kind of the rule set of like interpersonal relationships, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I wanted to pivot this a little bit because you said something a second ago that reminded me of one other thing you talked about with Ben, and I'm going to put that in the show notes for anybody who hasn't heard that interview because it's a real good interview. You guys talked a little bit about changing like the way things were going at Wizards is that they were designing for the players so that the players would buy stuff, and that you think that's just not the right way to do it. That the best decision is to make the best decision for the game, not for what will sell the product. And I'm wondering how that philosophy has changed your game design view. How does that impact your game design view?
Yeah, no. So one of the things for me is just thinking about this is a game for a game master, and your audience is the game master, and you're writing this stuff so that the game master can run the game. And it kind of struck me because I was just thinking about when you're writing, to give a very specific example, like you're writing rules. Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm writing rules for a player, like their character class, like my philosophy right now is be as concise and clear as possible, because you don't want the player to get confused about what their character can do, because that just introduces static. But also for the game master who's like, okay, my player didn't read the rules, so I have to look at this, that they can get okay, this is what this character should be allowed to do, because this is something where I as the game master am like, I don't want to be like, oh, your character can only do this or that when you thought you could do something different. Really thinking in terms of procedural clarity, your character can attack twice. This is what this means. You roll your attack, you resolve it, then you roll your second attack, you resolve it. Very much telling you what to do. Then on the flip side, thinking of GMs, and this is something that is just something kind of in the past few months I've really thought about. Thinking more in terms of, I'm trying to think how to put this. If the player rules are procedural, do this, do this, do this. The game master rules are more checklist-like. I'll just give a very simple example. In the combat rules, there's rules for cover. We might say, if a creature's in cover, its AC is 20. And something is in cover if you can say yes to any of these three questions. Right? So it's is this? Is it this? Is it this? And so trying to get the game master to understand that they are not following rules, they are implementing them. And it's a subtle but very important distinction between the player who is following rules. I want to cast Fireball. I can do that because it's written on my character sheet. To do that, I spend whatever magic points, or I make this check, or I burn a spell slot, and then Fireball tells me, pick a point, everything within this radius of the point takes this much fire damage, whatever it is. As opposed to the GM who needs to learn, there are times you're going to do that, you have a monster that just does a thing. But the game they're playing is the game of what happens if you throw a fireball into a wooden structure? Is it worth it? And this is the subtle thing. Is it worth it to say it explodes and bursts into flames? Maybe, maybe not, right? You have to kind of go through that mental checklist and go, is this building important to me? No, it's just some random man. Who cares, right? So maybe I blow it up because it'll be fun because the player, he blew something up. Or maybe I just won't say anything because the players just don't care. Or maybe it's actually really important. They're going to damage the thing. But, I didn't really telegraph that to the players. So it'd be kind of bogus to just suddenly decide it blows it up because clearly the players aren't expecting that. But I'm understanding that because I'm watching the players, right? I'll be honest, if I'm running a game, let's say, whatever the players, there's some shrine. It's a wooden shrine. And there's some orcs in it. And oh no, we got to get rid of the orcs, right? I throw a fireball at them. I might just run, okay, the orcs take some damage and they go running. But if one of the players goes, "Oh no, you might destroy the shrine because isn't it made of wood? It is kind of rickety," and the person, the person playing the wizard's like, "I don't care, I'm still throwing it." Okay, now that shrine's blowing up, right?
Or at least there's a dice roll for it.
Yeah, those die roll, right? There's something there because now it's like, oh, because in the the mechanics said one thing, but this kind of goes back to our GM thing. Like my GMing skill is like, hey, the players like socially now, hey, it's kind of fine if I throw that in now because the players were aware of it, or maybe I would just say, oh, but hey, before you cast that spell, like it's really rickety, and part of their like harvest festivals, they dump oil on this thing, lamp oil,
sure.
right? Sure. Like, and it's filled with orphans, right? And like, no, I still fireball. Okay, now I'm fine. But man, I don't know about you, but I've been at the table where it's like, okay, you throw a fireball, great. Oh, and by the way, a dozen burning villagers come running out screaming. Like, what are you talking? Like, what? There were villagers in there? Oh, you should have known. Because it's the festival. Yeah. And of course, during the festival, the villagers would all go into the shrine. Like, dude, that maybe is what the rules said, but that's just crappy GMing, right? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, this is the difference between playing D&D and playing Baldur's Gate. Like, when you play Baldur's Gate, you see the things on the screen and make decisions. But when you're playing a shared imagination game, even on, Foundry with all the bells and whistles and all the tokens, it's still a shared imagination game. You have to buy into that. Like, oh, we're going to make a few mistakes, but we're trying to get to a thing together.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've definitely all been there though, where the GM has not telegraphed. I mean, it's hard too. The GM has it in their mind. They don't want to change their thing because you blew up the thing and the villagers come out. Like, yeah, I get it. So wrapping up on Odyssey, like in your mind, is this like the opposite of RuneQuest? Is it no setting baked in at the moment, or do you have a setting that you picture when you're coming up with this rule set? Like I did notice you have like magic user and you have thief. So there's like a little bit of setting baked in, and you have like 3 classes, one of which is a ape humanoid, right?
Yep.
Like, tell us about the setting, I guess.
I like to think of it as like the setting as I'm showing it off now. Like I have some ideas for different settings I could do, because that's another thing is I wanted a system where I could I can make up worlds and just like do a one-off book and like here's a new setting. Again, Kickstarted so I can afford some cool art for it. So I think it's art.
Yep.
But the so I am calling it the open source fantasy world. Where it's like, I just literally went through like the SRD and like pulled out all the proper names and said, okay, cool, this is stuff I'll use because it's in here. And then just think like, okay, what's like the most iconic like fantasy stuff? Yeah, elves, dwarves, and so on. What's like their most stereotypical expression? Just to keep it straight and direct, so it can kind of, for me, it's the most flexible. But I do like to add things like, I just like apes. I liked Winston from Overwatch. Like I just thought he was cool. So, but I also, I have this like, what part of my feeling is like, if you come at this from a pop culture standpoint rather than a D&D standpoint, are there things where people are just like, well, of course you'd have cat people like that they're in every fantasy game, but for some reason not in D&D. So or like apes, things like that, where it's just like people just kind of think this is cool, so why wouldn't you put it in here? And so it's a little it's basically just trying to say, hey, here's what the standard issue fantasy world looks like, but I do want to throw in some little curves, again, just for like the core of like, here is the rules that you can use to play the game.
It sounds like the setting is mostly fantasy, except when Mike thinks it's cool. And then
I'm being super self-indulgent because I can't, I worked at Hasbro for 18 years, right?
That's why you become a game designer, Like, I had a funny thing, we have a con this weekend, Genghis Con here, and actually a bunch of guys are going to be there. Jeff's going to be there.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
But I'm trying to I was talking to my brother, I'm like, I need to find an adventure to run that's not Pirate Borg. I need to make it not about work, which it all is about work, And I'm like, trying to find an adventure. It's just what you said, man. I'm like, well, this is cool adventure, but it's not quite the right setting. And this is a cool setting, but the rule system is too much to learn for this weekend. I was like, wait, now what if I redesign? I was like, here I am in my like 2 hours in the evening before I go to bed and wake up to start work on Pirate Board again. I'm coming up with a new system. Like, it's a curse, man. So there's nothing wrong with adding your own stuff,
No, right. It's like once you see the matrix, you're just like, oh, I can't help but mess with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Once you see the code, you're like, I could just change this one block to that. Yeah.
So a lot of it is just like, for me, I just want something that if someone looks at it, like it looks enough like what they want to do that they can feel like it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
And that's probably like my limiter on it.
Yeah. Well, and you are a math and mechanics guy. So lean into your strong suits, right?
Hold fast, wretched sailor. We brace for the Broadside Barrage.
First system you ever played?
D&D BX.
Love that.
78 version. Yeah.
I just think it's so cool. I mean, this is not to immediately go into tangents, but I just love that the 5e, like, you know, dudes are like love BX and love the OSR. I just think that's so cool. You know, when I found out you were into the OSR, I was like, yeah, that's what's up. Most recent system that you've played?
Let's see. I played RuneQuest, the new RuneQuest that we're playtesting just last week.
How about most recent system that you've played that you're not working on?
It's either Shadow Dark or Old School Essentials, or I'm just trying to think of games I've played. No, because I ran Old School Essentials after the new year, so Old School Essentials, I'm pretty sure. So
RPG you haven't played yet that you would like to try?
Oh, wow. There's so many. I have to like look at my shelf, but I got Vastgrim right here. I bought it at Gen Con.
Oh, love that. Dude, Brian was the last guest I had on the show.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, no, I got all the stuff right here. And I'm just like, and you know, one of the things I loved about it was I just kind of like, I mean, this is the business side of me. Like, I just like the product lineup and stuff. And like,
yeah, dude, he's a good buddy of mine. I mean, we're like the two, you know, third party Morkborg guys. So we're always at con, and we're both Americans. So we're always at cons. I love Brian. Hi, Brian, if you're listening. Favorite edition of D&D?
It's close, but I do prefer 5e with to BX. Just because one of the things with 5e, it's easier for me to slice like this kind of goes to the Odyssey thing, right? It's easier for me to take 5e, slice it down to look like BX than it is to take BX and like build it up to look a little bit more like 5e. Because I like having a skill system. That's one of the things. And, you know, characters with like tricks and stuff.
But to be clear, we're talking 2014, right?
Oh, man. So I will say this, like, not just being the guy who's like, oh, are they, you know, no, but that was kind of like, yeah. I mean, the problem I have with 5.5 is it's like, I feel like they looked at the game and said, hey, what can we do to get Pathfinder first edition players into our game? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, I literally just don't understand it because I like, you know, I always thought that like the next edition, and we did a little bit of work when I was still working on D&D, like back in 2019. I remember a couple of the designers were neither of whom were there either, so I don't know, maybe this is just part of the deal, but like, you know, they were like, oh, like, you know, they had the system for like dungeon exploration that was like super simple, super lean. And I remember playtesting with them and thinking like, oh, cool, like this is the stuff that we should, if we do a new edition, like this is the stuff we should be putting in here. Like it just made it super fast and easy to like organize your party. It was great for like new players. Like, oh, you're in the dungeon. What's everyone doing? And it was just super simple. And I always figured like the next edition of D&D would be like, oh, here's the 64-page player's handbook, right?
I mean, I kind of would have thought they like would been, you know, leaned into the Critical Role vibe and dialed back the amount of rules needed. But, you know, I understand. I mean, the interesting thing is that I was thinking about this morning, actually. I was thinking just in preparing for this interview, like if I got the license, if someone was like, Luke, you have to hire a team, you're in charge of 6th edition. Like, man, we take all the good things out of the OSR. We'd be like, this is a game about imagination, and it's about rules that you can teach your, you know, wife or husband who's never played a role-playing game really quickly, but then it has the depth if you want it, rather than it being like I remember my wife and I learning 5e, that was our jump in. It's a lot, man, to build a character out of the gate. It's a lot. It's a big ask for someone who's not a gamer.
Oh, it's a ton. And, you know, that was why, you know, but way back in the day, that starter set was meant to be like, this is where you start. Like, we wanted to build a product line. I mean, this is one of the things I was very obsessed with. It's like, I don't want people at game stores telling people to buy the player's handbook. I want them telling them to buy the starter set. Yeah. Because they don't have to make characters. The rules are super slim.
Sure.
And they get to playing immediately, you know, as quickly as possible. Because that's what sells you on role-playing games, is playing them, not making your character. You know, sure, there are people like that, but most people, it's I can try doing anything cool, right? Like, yeah, you know, it's one of those things where I think structurally, I wonder if because they led with the player's handbook, when you're told replace this product, you know, the structure kind of like, well, this is the structure. Like, you know, this goes back to the idea that, like, you know, deciding how to organize your game team is also the act of designing your game.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
You know, so it's almost like, you know, okay, this is what we're building and we've got to refine this. And so
tricky. Maybe, you know, when you and I make 6th edition, we should make the Dungeon Master's handbook and the player's guide.
Exactly. Just cut it, right? Just say, no, it's different, right?
Yeah, just to see how it, you know, and then come out with the DM book first, and that's got all the rules, you know? Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to hold it against you that you are the first guest to mention their own game as their favorite version of D&D.
Am I the first guest who like led?
Well, but honestly, you're the first guest I've had who worked on actual D&D, so it's not really fair. Yeah. Okay, you, Mike Murals, are a 7th level character in a fantasy RPG. What class are you?
Oh, I would want to be like a wizard. Like, I think using magic would just be cool.
I mean, are we going Odyssey? Are you a magic user?
Yeah, I want to be a magic user.
Yeah, nice.
Because here's the thing. The first thing I would do, like, and then I go adventuring. Like, no, I would open a shop and just work. But like, the advantage I have is like, oh, my daughter doesn't want to go to bed tonight. Sleep spell, right? Like, oh man, I'm like late for a meeting.
It's such a parent answer. You know? It's such an adult in the 21st century answer. I'll be a wizard so I can make my daughter go to sleep.
I could fly around. I need to go to the green. I'll just cast fly and get over there, right? Like,
yeah,
I would not be an adventure. I can't go, like, if I get up in the morning and can't brush my teeth, I just feel terrible all day. Like, I know, I don't want to rough it.
Yeah, I'm with you. In hindsight, the OGL scandal, good for the whole industry and the hobby or bad for the whole industry and the hobby?
Oh, I think it's good. I think it kind of like, we talked earlier about this idea that people just kind of accept D&D and like, oh, here it is. I think the OGL, scandal shook that, and it kind of woke people up a bit to go, wait a sec, what's my relationship with this company? Do I need them? And I think like any trouble they're having with the new edition, I think is entirely due to that. Because, there is just this idea that we have a different relationship now with companies, especially entertainment companies, where we want them to kind of either align with our values or at least be, this idea that, hey, we respect and like them and they respect and like us back. That's the key, right? Like what I think is really interesting in gaming in general, you got the political sides of it, right? Where it's like, well, it's politics, left wing, right wing, whatever issue people want to bring up. But what I'm finding is there's a lot of people who aren't looking at it politically. Like, you're watching a streaming who says, oh, I don't trust the gaming press. It's like, well, is it political? It's like, well, no, when I read reviews, I feel like they're not speaking to me as an expert in this game. It's like, oh, I'm reading a review of like, I'll just pick up a game. I just downloaded it because I'm super excited to play Avowed. It's a role-playing game, Obsidian. And it's like, if I read a review of this game, which is going to be like maybe 40 to 60 hours of playtime, can I trust that like someone in the press who's like under deadline and like only has so many hours to give to it and doesn't want to make the people at Obsidian mad because maybe then they won't get access?
Yeah.
Do I trust that person, or do I trust the person who's like playing it on stream who's like, oh, and I know was a huge role player, and that's what happened to me. Like I watched this guy's review. I forget who it was. And they were kind of complaining about the game, but I'm like, yeah, but I like that stuff. So I'm going to definitely play this game, right? But I just feel like, there's this kind of thing right now where it's like the industry is struggling to like understand who it's actually selling to.
Sure.
And so I think that's what the OGL comes in that it's like, wait a sec, does Wizards institutionally understand me as a role player? Like, or are they more like, hey, the person who's writing the review of the game because it's on their schedule, it's what they have to do. Maybe they're not an RPG expert, or like, well, they only really put 10 hours into it. We're like, is that enough? Because I'm the person who wants to put in 60. Yeah. So does their opinion match up? Is like what I'm looking for.
Did they even play it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think you're kind of seeing something there where it just made people go, for you to think this was worth even considering, how unaligned with my values did you have to be? And then the other thing to keep in mind is like, look at like, there's like this joke now, like it's like once a quarter Wizards has some blow up about D&D. You unwind, you have the OGL, but then you also have all the stuff around the Spelljammer release where it's just like, hey, this is kind of offensive. Like, and then you rewind further and they're like, well, and this is where I think it's tough being in the seat, but like, you've got to have like a viewpoint. Like Spelljammer comes out and people were offended by it, but then like a year earlier there was a lot of stuff coming from Wizards about how, oh, we want to like remove race as a thing from the game, and like, okay, that's interesting. It's like, a lot of people were like happy to hear that, but then you go and do the Spelljammer thing, because it's like, okay, then who are you actually? Like, did you believe what you told to us? Like, I think that's fundamentally what people want, is authenticity, and I think that's what they're struggling with, is the OGL. If it had just been the OGL, I think they could have recovered from it. But it's not just the OGL. There's just like, the Spelljammer thing, the AI art thing, the Pinkertons thing. Like, none of these things. Yeah, they all, even the people. I mean, I forget. After Gen Con, when people, YouTubers were showing off the new Player's Handbook, then getting cease and desist letters. Like, who are you? Like, what? And that's the thing that strikes me the most, man. I was at Gamehole Con last October, and what struck me was how much fear there was. Like, people didn't want to engage because they're afraid they'd get sued. that like Wizards would like, send a cease and desist. Like,
Yeah.
and that to me, like, man, you can't have a healthy community if like,
No way.
people are expecting that. Like, if your creators are like holding back, well, they're because of fear, it's not just they're going to hold back, they're just going to leave. Because like, why would I want to deal with something that's stressful? Like, I could just, maybe, if I'm in it for the money, well, I'm probably going to make a video game or I'm going to become an accountant, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm in it just for fun, then why not work on games where like I don't have to worry about this with Shadow Dark or Old School Essentials or with Morkborg, right? Like, I'm sure like you don't like, the
Morkborg license is the best. You go nuts,
Yeah.
It's interesting you said video games because it kind of reminds me, I feel like this whole thing really, it's so different than video games because a modern video game, and I'm not talking like Darkest Dungeon where it starts as a small dev team, like a modern video game like Baldur's Gate has a larger staff than a Hollywood movie, right? And you need that to deliver that level of quality. You know what how many people worked on the best RPGs that I played last year? Like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So like you don't need yes, you can't make a whole like fully polished, fully rendered Magic the Gathering style art on every page with 2 or 3 people, but you can make a great system like Shadow Dark and play it at your table, like with a few people in a Kickstarter worth of artists. Like, I think that's one of the big reasons that I think the OGL blow up is like, oh wait, I can play quote D&D without playing Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Right. And like, I can be in a position where I can just tweet at or on Discord, just ask the creator a question and get an answer. Right.
Yeah.
And maybe especially that answer won't be like yes or no. It might be like, well, I think this, but like if you went this way, like, get much more of a hobbyist approach.
Yes. We really try to, people come in our Discord all the time and ask questions. And I'm always very clear, like at my table, I do this, but you should really do what makes sense for you. Like we're really clear. It's easier with a game like Morkborg or Pyroborg. Like, of course, there's not a rule, so there's something to interpret, but
yeah,
I'm with you.
No, but I think that's the thing is then you end up with attracting a community that is the community that you want to hang out with.
Yeah.
And even it's funny when you mentioned Baldur's Gate 3, like, but that to me that's a good example too of a game where it was a huge team, but like Sven, the owner of that company, like that's his vision. That's a studio where like they're making the games he wants to make, and he's hiring people who want to make the games he wants to make, right? Where a lot of times, especially like, for big corporate entities making any type of game, well, it's kind of the team you had because these are the people that were available, and people are like, maybe they're hiring on more for the paycheck than because they really want to make, a looter shooter, things like that. So then it's, where I think, role-playing games, this is a theory I've been bouncing around a lot. So if you've been hearing other shows I've been on, it's like, it's my thing for role-playing games. But there's basically this concept I have that when you have a product, there's a distance between the person who uses the product and the person who decides what the product is. And in some products, that distance can be pretty wide. So if I go to my grocery store and I need to buy milk, I don't care about how this milk was made. I don't want it to be made illegally, whatever. All I care about is what's the cheapest milk that won't give me food poisoning, right? Like that's it, right? Like I don't think too much. And the person who like is in charge of the dairy or whatever probably isn't thinking of me too much, other than like, what they're probably thinking about is just, efficiency. How can we source things? How can we transport things? How can we save money? But like games, especially tabletop role-playing games, that distance needs to be incredibly short because it is super important, right? Like it demands a lot of expertise and mastery, and it requires a lot of energy and thought from people who use them. I want that person to understand me and to be making decisions. Right. To what you talked about earlier, to the point like I'll just make my own, so that distance is zero.
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side, you have like it's almost like a bi-directional relationship now, because if you have a creator whose worldviews are too out of whack with the player, they'll bail. Like we see creators lose their communities because they're too far one way or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because you want to be able to share that with the community, and I think what we're seeing, and I think things are evolving. I think for a while there was this real sense of like, well, it's perfect alignment or else, and now I think people are more like, well, there are things that I don't agree with to the point where I wouldn't support someone, but I think people are getting a bit more like just recalibrating, because I think especially like when like this online idea of like you can interact with someone in a parasocial relationship, like it was easy to fall in the early days of social media and this availability of, I'm going to project my view of this person onto them. I would meet, when I was working on D&D, I'd meet people like at Gen Con, and I'd come away thinking, wow, the person they think they just met is nothing like the person they actually just met. Like, you just see this clear vibe that they think I agree with them on a bunch of stuff, whether it's politics or just general things, right?
Yeah,
like,
I understand.
But it's just like, I don't like, okay, that's sort of interesting, to get that vibe of like, oh, clearly you must believe whatever this thing is, and like, well, I don't know, and I don't know if we need to even talk about that because we're talking about games. But it's just sort of, and so I think that's part of the evolution, the process. But I think fundamentally, people do want to feel that they can trust a company, that they're putting a lot of their time and effort, not just not their money. Like, I think money is part of it, but only after you account for time and effort. I spend a lot of money on cheese and milk. But I don't necessarily need like that close relationship with the local dairy.
Well, and I think if you probably took the average D&D or RPG enthusiast's hourly rate and compared how long they spend in the game prepping and playing compared to the money they spent, you're right. The value there is the time, and they don't want to spend their time on, a corporation doesn't care what they want, I totally get that.
Because, it's all about the future time. That's what often when you see D&D, when the community is going sideways, it's people have this anxiety about their future investments. So I put all this time into learning this edition, and now you're changing it. Does it mean then my sunk cost is now dead?
Yeah.
Because all this expertise, all these campaigns I built, now they're meaningless because in the future I won't be able to use that.
Yeah,
and I think that is like that. When you introduce instability into that equation for any role-playing game, like that's a recipe for disaster.
Add an entry to the what's in the cargo hold of the Ship of the Dead D100 table.
An elaborately worked brass skull with a red gem in its forehead. The gem is glass. It's cheap. It's fake. It's worth nothing.
Okay.
But if that gem is taken out and replaced with a any sort of valuable stone and placed in, there's a spirit inside of it that gets like a percentage of its IQ and insight back based on the value of the gem you put into it. So someone put this like cheap costume jewelry in it to basically put this thing to sleep, to shut it up. And, if you put something, I'm going to use D&D terms, just, up to 1,000 gold pieces, then it comes back to life and it talks to you. And someone put that fake jewelry in there because this thing is a conniving bastard who will tell you it will help you, but it really just wants its body back.
So if you overfeed it, does it get like super intelligent?
Yeah, it starts getting more and more powerful. Yeah, I know. I'm going to throw it because I was thinking, it slowly drains the gem away of value.
Nice.
If you keep it too well fed, then it starts remembering, like, oh, no, actually, I want to build my body. So I'm going to start. So when it starts out, it doesn't really know any better, and it's kind of nice. And as its personality comes back, it gets more and more malevolent.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those, like any artificial intelligence movie where at first it's like really friendly and wants to know things. And then before you know, it's like, oh, no, I already did that for you. I already conquered that kingdom for you. Yeah.
I just want to make paper clips. Just stuff the children into the machine, right?
Yeah. Favorite size die?
Oh, I love the D20, man. I just like the feel of it in my hand. It's as close to an orb as we can get without going to like ridiculous D100s. But yeah, there's just something nice about rolling around a D20. I'm sure because a lot of it just the tactile memory of like playing D&D or old school and being like, are you sure you want to do that? Or like, okay, you ready? Because I'm going to roll the die, 15 or higher, right? And so I love the feel of that D20.
Do you have a favorite monster in the monster manual?
Ogre Mage. I think
I love that you knew it. I love that you had an answer.
That's my absolute favorite because it's just, I like that it's a big bruiser monster that casts spells, and that as a kid I was like, it's the best of both worlds, right? Yeah. And so
if you were given the rights to make an RPG for any IP out there, and it was guaranteed to make a ton on Kickstarter, and you could clone you and a small team to work on it, what IP would you choose?
I was super into Destiny for a long time.
Oh, I mean, I'm a long time Bungie fan. I didn't play Destiny, but Bungie is my jam going way back. Marathon for me.
Oh, Marathon, yeah. Pathways into Darkness.
Yeah, well, you could,
Minotaur, yeah. Well, I was a Mac
most
guy.
Most people don't know Marathon. The fact that you know Pathways is impressive.
Yeah, as a Mac guy, that was our only first-person shooter.
I know.
So back in 1993.
So Destiny RPG, yeah.
I think Destiny. I'm just trying to think back, and I'm sure there's something I'll think. No, wait, this instead. But because it's just such a cool world. I love the idea of like this magic, like sci-fi fantasy world in our solar system. Yeah. And I haven't kept up with it because I didn't really play much Destiny 2. But to me, it just hits such a cool tone of like, it really felt like science fantasy, like in a really relatable, cool way. So yeah, I think it'd be fun.
Okay, 5e mechanic you're most proud of.
Oh, it's got to be Advantage, just because it's probably like at the end of the day, that'll be the mechanic that I'm remembered for. If like
it's a great mechanic. Yeah.
Well, it's so like, it's one of the things where I was so proud of it because it was like, so it started in 4th edition. There's a class. It was the Divine Striker. I can't remember the class name. I think it was the Avenger or something like that. And that's the first time we had this idea like, hey, what if you could roll 2 dice and take the higher? Cool. Mm-hmm. And Rob Hainso and I worked on that. And then as I was looking at 5th edition, I remember I did this thing where I went back through like old D&D books and just like, what is the stuff I never used? So classic example would be like the giant table of attack modifiers. Like I never use these. Yeah. Like I'm a pretty hardcore D&D person and like I never use these tables. Like if people to the rules lawyer point, if someone started insisting we use the table, I wouldn't invite them back to my game because I think you're missing the point. Like, yeah. And so, yeah, the idea of just like advantage and disadvantage, just getting rid of all that. Plus, it appealed to my programmer side because one of the things I realized that made that modifier approach suck was that as a player, you were incentivized to like light up as many of the positive modifiers as possible. So it was endless. Right? Okay, like I'm going to attack. What's the modifier? Well, does this apply? No. Does this? Blah, 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 blah. And so very intentionally saying, nope, it just happens once. Once it's fired off, stop. And if like, you're not stacking dice on each side, like if you have advantage and disadvantage, they just cancel each other out. That's it. We're not going to stack them up because it just saves so much time in play. And it's one of those things where I think this is a better match for how people actually want to play these games.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So that's it. That's what I'm most proud of.
RPG or fantasy setting you would most want to visit?
Probably Middle Earth.
A common answer on this show.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think because most of them are terrible on some level.
They really are. Yeah.
Middle Earth is like, it's got that. It's funny because I was younger. I'm like, I want adventure. I'm like, no, now I just want like reasonable like stability. Yeah, I think just because it's also just the way Tolkien describes it, like it's so evocative. Like when I saw that movie back in like 2001, like it just was like blew my like, oh, this is it. Like yes, like yeah, this is Middle Earth. So yeah, so I think that's it.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars. It's not an easy decision for me because I do like Star Trek, but I like Star Wars' grimy future. It feels more grounded to me than
okay, cool.
Star Trek feels aspirational. Star Wars feels more realistic.
Sure. Well, let's follow up on that. You're on the Enterprise's holodeck. You're in the Enterprise's holodeck. What's the first program you're loading up?
I just want a quiet place to take a nap.
Where you can cast sleep on your daughter. It's literally just your house, but you're a wizard and you can cast sleep on your daughter.
It's just quiet. I think I like it I think just something really relaxing, and it's just because I've just been super busy lately.
That's okay. I love that's an indicator of where you are in life.
Yeah. But another thing is, and this is really dorky of me, but it's like, obviously I'm like, got nostalgia for my childhood. I think it'd be fun to just like explore my old neighborhood again, like through an adult eyes, right? Just like kind of walk around like the woods and stuff, ride a bike up and down the street, or even go to like, a video arcade circa 1982, just experience that again. Because, I was so young then, didn't really take it all in, and to go back now as an adult and see, okay, here's what was actually going on.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool.
Did you ever, not the movie, but did you ever read the book for Ready Player One?
No, I tried. I bounced off of it. I could not get into it.
There's like a section where he goes to Lake Geneva and like goes to Gary Gygax's house and like does all this. It's like really cool. It's kind of that vibe that you're talking about.
I think that would be another thing if you could get like, okay, show me the development of D&D, because there's all these books been written about it, and it sounds so dysfunctional. It's like, man, how did they get anything done? These guys all seem to hate each other. Yeah, it's kind of funny to like be a fly in the wall and see like what was actually like these dynamics like. So.
Yeah. You've been given an invincible time and space machine. What era of history are you visiting?
I'd say the future, but like, okay, that's a cop out. Just like, oh, what's going to happen?
But like, how far in the future? If you can only pick one, you like get one token.
Oh, 25 years. I'd like to see like, because I think we're at an interesting inflection point. So I think we'll see in 25 years like a pretty clear like.
Well, and you would be able to understand it. I feel like if you went 200 years in the future, there'd be no context for how we got there.
Right? Yeah, it's like everyone's just speaking in memes and like I don't even. So like, but also just on it like, as a parent, it would kind of be like, okay, so here's what I need to teach my daughter. Right?
Yeah, like, nice. I like that you picked a practical answer.
Yeah. So it'd either be like, yeah, honey, sure, go ahead and major in art. Or like, okay,
Dude, I could tell you're not a like fantasy loving horny teenager because your answer to holodeck was A Quiet Place, and your answer to Time and Space Machine was the future so I can protect my daughter.
no, it's simple, right? It's like you're either gonna like go to art school or you need to learn how to like preserve beef, right? Like be okay, here's how you kill squirrels and preserve the meat through the winter, right? Like,
yeah.
I gotta know what it's like Sarah Connor from the Terminator, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. If your answer was if you had to pick one back in time, where would you go? Like what what event in history do you want to watch?
I think it'd be really fun. I mean, again, this is gonna be kind of lame because I'm not going too far, but I think it'd be fun to live through the 60s again, just to see like that level of social upheaval. It's almost like the reverse of the 25 years in the future because it's like, okay, I'm living in the world that was spawned by the 60s.
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of interesting to see like when people talk about it. This is my little history like thing I get obsessed with because everyone wants to talk about the history like in our hobby. Oh, here's what Dungeons and Dragons. Here's how it was actually played, or here's what people actually thought. What I took away from that was like, oh, all history is very folklorish, right? Like even if you have all the data, you still don't really know what was going on in people's day-to-day lives, what they were thinking. We just can't conjure that up. So I think it'd be super interesting to see like, not the 50s because that's immediately post World War II. You're kind of like settling into what we become, like our modern culture. I think it'd be really fun to go back and like be there like when Tolkien's taken off. Like, okay, what was it actually like? How did people react to it? See this stuff evolving, and just kind of understand, oh yeah, so this is, and again, it's kind of dorky, but like kind of get like, oh, this is what my parents went through. Yeah. Which is, I kind of talked about like, oh, going back to the early 80s as an adult to see it through an adult's eyes.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of fun to go
I can
back,
really understand, especially like the late 60s, early 70s. I want to go to a library and meet Tolkien fans and play D&D for the first time kind of vibe would be really cool. And
computer culture, technologies that's taking off, like what was like that, to be at the, whatever the computer club was that like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak when they met. What was that dynamic like, to early days of Atari, right? Like, did they know?
For me, it's actually Bungie. I'd be like going to Chicago and watch those guys make Marathon would be so cool, Favorite libation or beverage during your RPG sessions?
Oh, I love Coke Zero. It's just like, it's all the fun of Coke without any of the calories. Which, especially like I said, working from home now, I'm like, I packed on a lot of weight this past year. I need to get back to working that off. That for me, it's good. It's just enough caffeine to keep me going, but not so much that I can't and then just actually settle down after the game. So
nice. Okay, my final question: video or computer game you've logged the most hours playing?
It might be Magic Arena just because I played so much of it. No, actually, I know which. Cyberpunk 2077.
Oh, really? I just started playing it, actually.
Yeah, during the pandemic, this is like, okay, I get to drive a car around the city.
Wow, yeah, you like really doubled down into like, we're headed here. I'm going to go there now.
Yeah, and it was just so. I know the game, especially early on, had a lot of bugs. I mean, CD Projekt had really turned it around, but the even in the early days when people were like, oh, it's kind of buggy and stuff, I still like just loved exploring the city and seeing all the neighborhoods and everything and seeing something which I wasn't a huge Cyberpunk 2020 player back in the day, but like I knew of it and I was always interested in it, but I think I just kind of missed the window to get into it. Like, yeah, none of my friends were like super into it, so it's kind of like, okay, it would have been just a solo thing. But yeah, seeing that come to life was like super cool. And it's funny because Baldur's Gate 3 I really appreciate and enjoy it, but I couldn't get super into it the way like some games just suck me in. And I think maybe I need to go back and try playing again. I put like 20 something 30 hours into it, so I enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, that's nothing compared to. I mean, did you even beat it at 30 hours?
No. I think it's almost like I was too close to it because I was involved like early on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's probably too much like work for you.
Yeah,
you're like watching mechanics you developed unfold on screen.
Exactly. Yeah, it's much improved. Actually.
Yeah, it'd be like if we ever make or I license a Dark Caribbean video game, it'll be impossible for me to enjoy it because I'll be like, well, that's not how that would work. This is in the wrong area. But I could get the Cyberpunk thing. I think for me, the nice thing about the video game 2077 compared to the role-playing game, and I've said this a bunch on the show about Cyborg. Cyborg is amazing as a book, amazing RPG, but I don't really want to pretend I'm there. Like, I don't want to role-play in that world. It's too close to reality. It's too dark, but realistic. But the video game, I don't have that problem. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just load up my tech and drive my sweet car, hang out with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a blast to have you. I would love for you to plug your Patreon, tell everybody what you're up to and where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, sure. So my Patreon is patreon.com/Mike Murals. That's Mike Murals, just one word. So right now I'm working on Odyssey. So it's kind of like my hack of 5th edition, trying to make it more streamlined, but more evocative for players. I'm also probably going to end up doing some 5e stuff just because like, as I'm building it, sort of in passing, it's like, well, I could also do 5e content, which might have, like when I was playing 5e, I wish I had this stuff. So hey, why not? And it's fun, to kind of go back and work in the game that kind of made my career. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing over there. I'm also on X at Mike Murals, all one word, or Twitter, whatever it's called these days. I'm on Blue Sky, but Blue Sky's kind of weird. I've had some good conversations over there, but not as often as I'm having on Twitter. So but yeah, I'm in both places, and I think on Blue Sky I'm just Mearls, Mearls. So
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the Ship of the Dead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This is great.
You've been listening to the Ship of the Dead podcast. Email your questions, comments, and buried treasure tips to shipofthedead@limithron.com. You can support the program, join our Discord server, get early access to new episodes, and instantly download hundreds of battle maps, assets, and adventures at limithron.com/Patreon. Tiers start as low as $2 a release, and you only get charged when I make something new. Pirateborg, my rules-light, rum-infested hack of Morkborg, is available now at pirateborg.com and retail stores everywhere. Ship of the Dead is produced by Limithron LLC, our audio editor is Matt Kepler, and our music is by Alexander Miller. For more, head to limithron.com.